But I will start with just welcoming everyone. Happy Monday evening to you all. My name is Rowan. So I'm part of Greener Basingstoke, who are putting on this event. And a very big welcome to the lovely councillors Simon Bound and Hayley Ecachus. It's really nice of them to join us. Our agenda this evening is really going to be a very short introduction from me, because really we want to hear from Simon and Hayley. There's going to be a brief presentation from them. So I know you've probably seen already, it's about 8 to 10 minutes, if that's okay, which is a bit of a whiz for a presentation. But I know you've got some slides lined up, and hopefully the tech will be working and allow you to share those. What we'd like to move on to, and the bit that we've allotted the most time for, is a longer Q&A session. We had some questions from the last town hall meeting, and you very kindly got some responses. And so I'd like to go through as many of those questions as we can. If anyone does happen to have a little follow-up question at all, then please feel free to use the chat feature to add your questions. If we've got time to get to them, then I will, I promise. And Hayley and Simon, please don't be worried, because they will be, I'm sure, some lovely open questions from all of our residents here in Basingstoke, who are really keen to sort of understand, you know, what's going on here with our climate and ecological emergency. So that's the agenda for this evening. In terms of just putting this into context, obviously everyone is aware we're facing a climate and ecological emergency at the moment. We know the main cause, that's the emission of greenhouse gases. We know where they come from. It comes from burning fossil fuels, that's about 80% of it, and also farming, dietary and consumption behaviour, that's about 20% of it. There's a bit around waste management and our land usage as well. Now, net zero is the minimum that we need to achieve. It's absolutely vital. It obviously doesn't stop the emergency, but should stop it from getting worse. So really what Greener Basingstoke is here for is ideally, you know, helping protect people and planet here in the borough. So people across Basingstoke have come together to form Greener Basingstoke. We support community-led responses to climate change, helping shrinking supplies of fossil fuels, building local resilience and well-being, and we try and work on a whole range of different issues. We were previously known as Basingstoke Transition Network, and we've got sort of 9 key themes which you can see on our website. And yes, as I say, we try and help with as many things as possible. Now, this town hall format really is all about questions from the public that have been sent in advance to the councillors to answer. So I guess really without further ado, I'd like to introduce them. Simon Bound is our current leader of the council, and I believe Simon from May last year, is that right?
It was from, I want to say, the 28th of February this year.
Oh gosh,
it's much newer than that, but it feels like a very long time. But we all know time has a strange way of playing games with us, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. So yes, it's wonderful that Simon can join us. Hayley, I think you've been in your role for longer, though, is that right?
Well, not necessarily just the environment, because then I was doing bins and Mark Raffel had it for a while. So I have been in the cabinet for some time though. Yeah.
Yes, lovely, excellent. So plenty of experience, lots of knowledge, and really, you know, providing leadership to the council, the political administration here in Basingstoke, and helping develop local, regional and national policy, and dealing with strategic partnerships. So yes, it's really down to, I think, both of our lovely councillors here to share their presentation with us to begin with, and I'll jump in if we start to run over time and move us on quickly to our Q&A session, which is really what our town hall meeting here is about. So hopefully you're able to screen share, and everyone will be able to see some slides up on their screen in a moment, and we can let you both speak and share with us. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. I'll hand over to Hayley, who will take us through the presentation.
Yeah, thank you. So I think all of you know who I am. So I'm Hayley, Councillor Eachus, the portfolio holder for the environment here at Basingstoke and Dean. So I will whiz through this because I know we've only got a short period of time, and obviously the questions and the debate's probably going to be more important. most of you, and probably all of you, will know that as a council, we declared a climate emergency declaration back as long ago as September 2019. That's got some very ambitious targets. That's to cut our own council emissions by 2025 to become carbon neutral, and then for the rest of the borough by 2030. And we are working towards that. We do have the added challenge that most other big organisations like the county council, the government, etc., their targets aren't until 2050, but we're still putting all our priorities into achieving the targets that we have set. Protecting the environment and tackling this climate emergency is a core priority for this council and for our administration. And as a result of that, since we declared the emergency back in September 2019, we've reduced our carbon footprint, reduced our emissions by over 66%. We're developing a new council plan at the moment, which is out for consultation. It
will be soon. It is officially, but we haven't launched the website yet.
Yeah. And you'll see in there that there's a green thread running through everything we do. And we also make sure that as a council, when we're making decisions, that green thread is running through all of that. All of our reports now have an environmental section that's taken into account in procurement. We have an officers delivery group who meet regularly with the climate change officers that all come together to ensure that green is running through that and it's not something that is forgotten. So our draft plan, you'll see, commits to tackling climate change to meet the challenging carbon neutral targets, and also to enable communities to be sustainable, and protecting and enhancing the environment is also important to us, and that supports the ecological emergency that we've also declared. So our plan was produced, which is this one here shown on the screen, but it was produced in response to the climate emergency declaration, and it's called the Climate Change and Air Quality Strategy. Now, that's the overarching document that deals with the 6 key areas of action by all: buildings, transport, the zero carbon electricity, waste and consumption, and natural environment. So as I say, they're the overarching document, and those are the main subjects. But then we then have across the council a number of other policies and strategies that sit behind that to ensure all of these things are being dealt with. Yeah, so in terms of local emissions, you'll see there that whilst we are taking steps to cut our own emissions, we are aware that reaching that target of carbon, of a net zero carbon borough by 2030 is ambitious. Our emissions as an organisation only make up 1/5% of those for the whole borough. Actually, most of you will understand and know that most emissions come from homes, travel and industry, and they're areas that we as a borough council have varying levels of influence over, or that we don't control. So it is also about us encouraging others to do what they can, and behaviour change, because we as a council absolutely can't do everything, and we can't do it on our own. And I think I said earlier that someone like the government, who's obviously got a huge influence, their targets aren't until 2050, so it does make it more challenging for us as a borough. Tackling the emissions will therefore require action by all of us, and it's great to have groups like you who can then get those messages out to the communities and help us work with communities to understand the importance of absolutely everybody doing their bit, because even if every resident did a small part, then it would have such a big part to play in overall reducing our emissions. So successes to date as a council, I've got some ideas here on the slide, and we've done quite a bit. I won't list every single one, but I'll give you an overview of some of the things that we've done. So we've cut carbon by ensuring we and key service providers buy renewable energy for our own properties. We've installed LED lighting in our offices to make them more efficient. We've consolidated into one office here at Basingstoke and Dean. We've got 10 tonnes of carbon as reduced emissions from our fleet, including new electric vehicles for our parking and community safety patrol teams. We've also provided our waste contractor with a repayable loan to ensure they invest in and use more environmentally efficient refuse vehicles. And we're also working with Serco to use waste food oil for their waste lorries to make them more efficient. And the council is also trialling waste food oil for our own operational vehicles, where electrical alternatives are less readily available, because some of those electric options that are out there just wouldn't have the capacity to do the miles and the work that the current fleet does. What else we doing those? Well, we directly manage a diverse range of habitats, including over 80,000 trees across 100 hectares of woodland. Collaboration is key to achieving the aim to continue to soak up the carbon that way. Biodiversity, I know, is a big thing, and we work hard to deal with that. Our rangers are working alongside 187 volunteers across 17 conservation groups, with other partners such as the Hampshire and the Isle of Wight Wildlife Trust. And together they're enhancing the diversity of plants and animals across more than 300 hectares of natural green space. And we are planning to further strengthen our ranger team to help increase this in the future. We also use our role as the local planning authority to promote creation and enhancement of natural habitats. And this means working with developers to agree ecological enhancements. And our local plan also requires that all developers over 0.1 hectares in size demonstrate a minimum 10% net gain for biodiversity. And I know, obviously, we're putting the refresh of the local plan together at the moment, and we are all working together to ensure that green runs through that as well, and things like biodiversity are important in that. We've installed 15 public chargers to date across our car parks. And then the one in Feathers Yard was Hampshire's first electrical vehicle charging hub. And we are working to get more charging hubs out there. We are doing some work with Winchester as well to look at more on-street charging points for people that don't have easily accessible driveways to charge their vehicles. I know there's been some delay in that because I think it's an issue with the contractor that Hampshire is using, but our officers are on top of that and looking to push that forward as soon as they can with Hampshire. We're also, over the last 18 months, residents have accessed more than 380,000 of funding for energy efficient home improvements. So that's all through grants. Well aware, and it did come up at the last committee meeting, that we do need to push grants more and make sure residents are aware of where they can get help for these things. We do have the comms team working with the climate change officers to set up a new website. So it will be different branding and all around the green and environmental and biodiversity things we're doing here at Basingstoke and Dean, but trying to pull that out to give it its own separate, I don't know what to call it, like its own
domain.
Yeah, domain. So it's not at the moment. I think if you go onto the website, it gets lost in everything else we do. Whereas this will mean it will have its own separate identity and it become a lot more important and a stand away from the council, but also to signpost people to different things that they can do and different grants that they can obtain. So next, we've got areas of focus. So I mentioned it again at the committee meeting last week, but we are looking to create a green team. So that will be a team of people who will provide in-person and remote support to residents and businesses. So as well as having a new website will be great to signpost people, but this team will be able to note certain areas where there may be issues with where the houses are properly insulated, and they'll be able to target those areas in person and go out to work with those residents. So instead of just having a letter through the door or an email that somebody might not take seriously, it will be that sort of face-to-face, which I think will be really important. And so that's in the budget, which is out for consultation. And as long as that gets passed, then the team are already looking at how we can get those in place ASAP early next year. So budget-wise, it's probably going to be March, April time. Yeah. But yeah, we're working on that, and I think that will be really helpful for the residents to have that face-to-face interaction. The policy development, so as you'll see there, it says exploring opportunities, including for low-carbon homes as part of updating the local plan. So as I say, the local plan is being updated, and we make sure that the green thread runs through that and all of the issues with environment that come with house building, that we're taking all those on board. We're also looking at the potential for an electric car hub, which Simon's really proud of, and it's his baby, which I think is great. So for those So I suppose for those people that don't need a car all the time, so it wouldn't be cost effective to go out and buy an electric vehicle, they could use it. Or those that don't have easy parking, or younger people, they've worked in other places, and I think it would be great if it would work here, and we're working quite hard on that. Decarbonising buildings, we are continuing to provide and promote grants and schemes that enable people to improve the energy efficiency of their homes, businesses, reducing fuel bills and carbon emissions. And alongside this, we are also currently undertaking an audit into our own operational properties to scope out changes required to improve energy efficiency. So that's more than just going out and doing an EPC, but getting people out there and really looking at what can be done to try and reduce the carbon footprint of these buildings. So that's an ongoing project which we are working on at present. Community engagement, I think I've made that is very key because everybody needs to do their bit, but it's having that assistance or being pointed in the right direction by us as a council. Market research is building on the resident survey to better understand barriers to sustainable behaviour change, so we can understand where we can step in and assist. And then enhancing green spaces, which it says there on the slide, exploring further opportunities to enhance green space with benefits for biodiversity and capturing carbon. We're looking at getting a biodiversity zone in every ward. And in fact, looking at it, we do have so many biodiversity zones at the moment. It's not just like the Biz and Hatch Warren, but we've got so many different areas where biodiversity is important, where we've got local nature reserves, where we've got management plans, where we work with volunteers to deal with those areas, to enhance them and to also keep them managed and on top of them. And the partnership working. So, for instance, we did have a very good meeting with the housing associations recently with members to understand how they are working, because they obviously own huge amounts of property and so many of them aren't energy efficient. So working with them to ensure that they are taking steps to better those buildings and make them more energy efficient. I think I've covered most.
We're just about out of time as well, Hayley. I don't know if you've got any further slides, or is that the last one?
No, I think the next one is just says any questions, doesn't it? Yeah.
Oh yes, there's lots of questions. So I don't know if you want to just take the screen share off, and then we'll be able to see you. We have already collated some questions which I know you've seen in advance, and we've got some wonderful answers which I'm hoping you'll be able to share those with everyone this evening. I'm just going to take a few of those questions and give them to you both. So I don't mind who answers, or maybe both of you want to answer. It's entirely up to you, but we'd really welcome your responses and anything that you might have to add. And you very kindly probably really already touched on some of those topics, but I'm going to jump straight in with a subject that's actually very close to my heart, and that is nature and biodiversity. So the first question is just, please talk to us in a bit more detail about what's being done to ensure that the green spaces, and you mentioned 300 hectares across Basingstoke, are actually being managed to improve biodiversity and tree cover. So that was one of the questions that we had in from the public.
Perfect. Thank you, Rowan. And we'll just probably have to find our way through it, because of course we've given quite an extensive answer to the question in writing, because there is quite a lot going on, and some of that's about making sure that we've got the ability to do a lot of that. One of the questions that I asked as the new leader of the council back in February was actually, do we really know what's going on? Because I think sometimes processes and systems don't necessarily capture what's going on the ground. And there are lots of things that we've said very formally, but we're also looking at making sure we invest in quite a lot of technology, because at the moment it can get caught up in the processes of the council. So the response that I got was, well, of course, we're doing some things formally, and it can be quite complicated as far as how we instruct people to change the cutting regime or work with volunteers to know what land is being managed in what way. So what we've tasked the officers to do is to ensure that, and it's one of the first things that I said as the new leader, which is actually we had biodiversity improvement areas in every ward. And by how we do that really is to make sure that we've got all the tech that identifies we have so much green space in our borough, it must be really easy to identify what areas and we do know some people get obsessed about pieces of grass being cut like a tennis court, but actually which bits can be left, which bits can have a different cutting regime, which bits we need to find people to help us and volunteer to manage, which bits we've already got volunteers who want to manage. And some of that is sadly in the process of how do you manage our external teams to do that. So we're really focused on identifying what's already happening as a stage one, because what we've identified, I thought I was being bold by standing up in full council and saying we commit to doing this. Well, the reality is that there is already biodiversity improvement happening in every ward. We just haven't captured it. We haven't articulated it. We haven't asked for volunteers to help us do it, because actually sometimes we all know green spaces are better supported by local volunteers. So there's a reality about that says we've got a lot happening. There's also something about making sure if we looked at policies and strategies, which of course is our way of enabling others to do the right thing. We've got a new central government bill that talks about minimal biodiversity improvement, which is something sort of relatively low at 10%, but actually saying within our local plan policies, what should that minimum percentage be here at Basingstoke and Dean? And there's probably also something which we need to sadly remind people. I was at a business earlier this morning where one of their experts was reminding me that, of course, actually some things that were the answers 10 years ago, which were, do you know what, should we plant British oaks everywhere? Well, probably those trees won't survive in 20 years if we do that. So we need to make sure we also plant the right trees in a biodiversity sort of acceptable way that will also survive. Otherwise, we'll be wasting our time.
Yes, lovely, wonderful. Thank you, Simon. And it's very true. I tend to agree with you there. Now, I'm going to jump on to the next question, if that's okay. Apologies, Hayley, if I'm sure you had plenty to share as well on that. But the next question I'd like to ask is probably more to do with the housing side of things. So I think, let me have a look. The question that I think has sort of come up quite a few times now from different individuals is about passive house building design standards. So this is more to do with new housing as opposed to retrofitting old housing. But really, how are we going to be managing our new housing? And are we able to push further on going above and beyond legislation to say, can we have passive house building design standards for all new housing?
I think that's a very complicated answer to what appears to be a very simple question. And I remember a conversation with people like Martin at I think it's the Low Carbon Forum meeting before I was leader, about some of the things that we need to enable us to do a good job for our residents are things like agreed national standards. And it's that whole conversation, isn't it, about whether it's passive house, whether it's passive house plus, whether it's LETI, whatever the appropriate standard is. Are we talking about net energy use per square meter, all of those things? That one of our challenges is we've got a local planning process, which, let's talk roughly, gets revisited every 5 years. But we know in the area of climate, standards and expectations and technologies move much quicker than that. And we had a very interesting debate in the Low Carbon Forum that actually which was the best standard, and our experts nationally can't even agree on what that is. I think it's easy to say there are some things like passive house plus, LETI that go further than the minimum requirements that will be coming into central government legislation. And we would certainly want to put those into our policies for our local plan update.
Lovely. Thank you, Simon. That's great. Just with regards to new housing still, just because this is a hot topic in Basingstoke, what's being done to stop us running out of water with all the new houses being built?
Another interesting topic. I was talking to the same company this morning about water. That their business relies on clear water from our chalk streams locally. And of course, there's something that we've discussed a lot about in committee here in the council that says we sadly have to rely on all the statutory authorities for all sorts of advice, where it's their job to monitor, to evaluate, to set what the classification is of some of our things. And I think generally it would be fair to say across the board here at the council, we're quite unhappy with our statutory bodies. We wish they monitored more. We wish they were better at evaluating that. We wish some of the legislation, if I think about, I always get the two confused, whether it's nitrates and sulfates or whatever it is, the legislation talks about one but not the other. When it comes to water quality, people, as far as our water companies and our utilities, have a statutory responsibility to say, yes, it will be fine, and tell us what their plans are to build the infrastructure. But actually their implementation of those infrastructure plans always seems to be delayed for some reason. Some of that, if I was to give them the benefit of the doubt, is about how building sites get built out, which they are not in control of. So it's quite difficult to plan the large infrastructure projects that are required. And I'm hopeful that the new Levelling Up bill will help with some of those processes, because wouldn't it be great if that infrastructure funding came up front? So it wasn't reliant on a developer deciding how much or where or how quickly they were going to build out new builds.
So true, so true. We will have to wait and see on that, won't we? Who knows yet? Thank you so much, Simon. Just still on housing, the next question is retrofitting. So how can we, given the housing stock in Basingstoke, especially because of the climate crisis and fuel poverty at the moment, expand much quicker? There are grant schemes and there are great things going on at the moment, but how can we get that retrofitting to net zero standards happening really quickly as we actually need?
There's probably, sorry, Hayley,
it's fine.
For me, I've got some really strong views about perhaps our housing providers. I happen to know, because they used to be a resident in my ward, about a pilot bungalow in Steventon that's off-grid, used to have an oil tank, and actually with one of our housing providers, they've put extra insulation in, they've changed the windows, they've put a heat pump in. I know the residents are really happy about it, but I was really intrigued that I didn't know that pilot was happening from our housing providers. And there's something for me that says, one of the jobs for us as a council, I think, is to get those stories out there, because actually if people are concerned or fearful about what it means, wouldn't it be great to hear from that resident directly and his wife to say, this is our experience? And again, talking to I went to do the presentation with some of the climate team with our over 55s forum. And of course, what becomes really clear is there's quite a lot of funding out there, but that makes the whole sort of grant schemes really complicated, which is why we, in the new draft plan, Hayley touched on the green team. And for a couple of years, we've been talking about, it's been very sort of popular, hasn't it, about nudging people to change their behaviour. And I believe with quite a lot of our residents, what they need isn't a nudge. They need somebody to knock. They need somebody to knock on the door and say, let's think about your circumstances, your home, and let's help you understand what's available, and even perhaps help you fill in the funding forms so that we can, again, build up that critical mass of people who've experienced it, who've done it, it's worked. We build up a level of knowledge in the community, and we have helped people, because I'm sure lots of people on this call know, it's really complicated. You do almost have to be an expert in the funding streams.
I'm absolutely sure, if you've got to fill out forms after forms after forms, then yes, it is very complicated, isn't it? I'm going to jump onto another question, because I'm always conscious of time here, and I know we want to get as much from you as we possibly can, so thank you. I'm going to jump onto a different topic this time, and this is about generating local renewable energy from solar or wind power and supporting renewable energy projects across the borough. So it's just really whether or not the local plan is going to be updated to allow and also encourage things like onshore wind generation within the borough.
Yeah, it's hugely controversial, isn't it? And it's probably the question that I've been asked most by people since I've been leader, would say, well, how can you be serious about your climate targets when our development control committee keeps turning down solar farms, other renewable energies. And somebody even said to me, well, they thought wind farms were banned in the borough. I think there's some practical issues. Again, when we put a call out for sites for the local plan update, not only do we put out a call for sites for housing sites, but also for green sites for whatever reason. And I personally was shocked when we got nobody promoting sites for anything green, none. And there's something probably about understanding where the power lies, because that's probably in developers' hands and landowners' hands. There's also something about the controversy that often goes with solar and wind farms. We know that's apparent everywhere. But there's also something, isn't it, that says, and this is slightly controversial, I suspect, if there are areas that are reluctant to have housing, can they have something else? And it's that stuff, isn't it, that says, is that a solar farm? Is that a wind turbine? What is that? And personally, I was very frustrated when I went to one of our council committees when I had the planning portfolio and said, okay, you're very reluctant to express a clear view about renewable energy production and greenfields, but how do you feel about it on brownfield sites, on top of car parks? We've got lots of supermarkets with lots of acreage of car parks. Could we do that? And of course, it's then very interesting, the response I got from town councillors, because of course they then knew that the residents that live next door to supermarkets may not be very happy with the aesthetics. And we've got some tough decisions to make, haven't we, as citizens? And we've got to be really, I think, challenging to ourselves to say, what is it that within those tensions we're happy to make some compromises on? And I suspect we can't compromise on the planet. We may have to compromise on some of our views about aesthetics.
It's changing the level of expectations, I think, isn't it? Absolutely, Simon. Yeah, lovely. Thank you very much. I'm going to go on to the next question now, which was now on to transport. So it's about bus services, actually. But really, I suppose if you think about sort of public transport in itself, just why the services feel to people as not being enough. So not run for long enough during the day, perhaps not all days of the week, not going to enough places. Yes, there are always going to be people that want their cars, but perhaps if it's quicker to get there by bus because we've got bus lanes and the bus goes directly to the place they want to go, the most frequent places, then maybe we get more people onto the buses. And perhaps there's a generation that will be more inclined to do that because they are more used to doing it and feel that they've taken environmental choice, a decision in their life not to learn to drive.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. And I think even from my own personal experience, I'm always very interested about talking to younger people when so many of them aren't taking their driving test, are they? At the moment, they are thinking about doing it a different way or leaving it so later in their life. I think there's something about cars and transport that, again, we've inherited some difficulties when it comes to the climate. We've got a town in Basingstoke that's designed for the car. That presents us with some challenges. We've also got some areas of deprivation in our town, which is why as Hayley says, I'm a great advocate for the EV charging club, because actually we also know as people get more aware and happy to discuss climate, that we know we're talking about from operational carbon to embedded carbon. So it is car the problem or owning a car the problem. And so there's all sorts of facets to transport, isn't there? There's a reality that says, for me, the EV charging club hopefully will help people to understand they don't need to own a car and they can still get the convenience of a car. It will open up the ability for lots of people who can't afford EV cars because they're not cheap to access them. And we've got lots of areas, particularly in the town, where people currently can't afford to own a car and the convenience that provides. There's something about buses that says at the moment, I think, and I won't speak for the county council who are the transport authority, but certainly if I talk about our subsidies that we subsidise bus routes for, we've got to question that challenge if we're spending hundreds of thousands of pounds subsidising bus routes, which are currently having a net negative impact on climate because there aren't enough passengers on them. And I think we're currently on a number where you sort of need 8 or 9 people for the net benefit of a bus to be positive for the climate. And we need to think about, and more of that technology is available where you can do. Can we make on-demand public transport work? You know, we're all in the world of apps, aren't we? That says, actually, is there an app that helps us understand how we can express a need for a piece of public transport that comes closer to our door? We perhaps also need to help people understand there's a level of expectation, I think, about convenience, where if I thought about some of the towns and cities that have strong public transport networks, it also gives them some other challenges. We perhaps do need some of our people to walk to a bus stop which is further away from their house rather than the one that's close to their house, because that will help their mobility as they get older and keep them able to walk further distances. And there's some real tensions, challenges, and perhaps some different thinking that's required about transport in general. It's even things like we will say in strategies and policies about modal shift and getting more people to walk and cycle. Basingstoke, in some respects, is designed in a really easy way to walk and cycle, but people still don't do it.
You could definitely say that sometimes, yes, because they want to go to a drive-through or whatever it is. But let's hope that as time comes along and there are a lot more nudges, that changes. Mm-hmm. My next question is around waste collection and recycling. So it's been asked here, and this probably links in with the anaerobic digester. I suppose the collection for it, does it need to be weekly is the question here. Could it not move to fortnightly for those black bins, saving money potentially? And why not collect food waste when the digester nearby collects it, as people are understanding, for other councils, other areas?
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? And I'm not going to let Hayley speak, because Hayley, Simon, I've wanted to introduce alternative weekly collections for years, and
I want monthly collections now.
by other people. For me, and we've just conducted a resident survey, and we asked a very specific question about recycling and environmental issues. And for me, there's that reality, isn't that we've got, I think it's the Environment Bill that's coming down the track that starts talking about statutory food waste in a couple of years' time. You know, what does it mean as far as recycling and general waste? What does it mean for the county council as the disposal authority as far as the infrastructure that's required to dispose of all of those things? And also, and I congratulate Hayley for this actually, which is to continue our morally important stance that says, unlike other councils up and down this country, if we think something that can be recycled isn't going to be, and it's going to be put on a boat and we don't know where it's going to go, it's going to be incinerated or buried somewhere else in another country, that is not the responsible thing to do. We should not be misleading anybody that their activities to recycle don't end up in recycling. So we do need a system change, which is what the Environmental Bill does. It puts us all in a very similar system. It creates those sustainable markets, and I hope government will intervene to invest in some of that to make sure it does happen with seed funding. But also there's something about priding ourselves as a council that we've got really good quality services. There is some tension about that, because Hayley will always say to me, she'll always say, Simon, do you know what, if we go to fortnightly recycling, fortnightly general waste and weekly recycling, the recycle rates will instantly go up. But I think we also have to do that in consultation with residents, because I can still look at my communal bins that I have with my neighbours. I can still look at lots of people who I am genuinely shocked that don't recycle, and bust some of those stereotypes about whether it's older people or younger people that are really invested in recycling in the future, and be very frustrated that that doesn't happen. When we've got, I think is it a third of our waste and general waste at the moment could be recycled?
Yeah,
and
a third of what goes into the incinerator. But I think that's because people become lazy, because they know it's easy to put anything in their black bin and it'll be emptied within 7 days. And, you know, without pushing people more, it's not going to happen. But I get what Simon's saying with communal bins. We've always had a problem in platted areas. But again, that can be something we can look at separately to allow everybody else to. And I think when we last looked at AWC many, many years ago, climate climate change was an issue, but it wasn't at the forefront of people's minds like it is today. And it was before the climate emergency declarations that the government and everybody has announced. So I do think when we consult with residents again, people will see it as a lot different. And I think if you do have food waste, and it's certainly something we're looking at, and Hampshire's really on top of that now and looking to put infrastructure in place, why would you have a weekly waste collection if you're collecting food waste regularly? It just doesn't make sense, really.
I love it. It all sounds very sensible to me.
Sorry, I just suddenly thought of one other thing. The conversation that we had at a presentation on Thursday last week, which is really exciting for me. So we've never really been able to look at electric vehicles for our black bin and green bin collections because of how big the borough is. And just picking on somewhere like Whitchurch, further out from Chinham, to then go and collect all those bins and come back to dump it at Chinham and go out again. You just wouldn't have the capacity to collect all the bins in the day. But there are now really good electric vehicles out there for food waste, because although they're doing the same miles, they're holding less weight and they're much smaller vehicles, because it's not just the miles in an electric car, it's everything else that is going on around it. So because there's less weight on it and they're smaller, that's all available. So again, food waste become even more carbon friendly and easier.
Lovely stuff. I mean, what it comes down to, I think, is reduce the amount of waste anyway, and then there's less going in those bins. So
well, exactly, don't make the waste in the first place.
But isn't that quite telling that when you talk to all of those areas that have got food waste, that as soon as they introduce food waste collections, their food waste goes through the floor, because actually suddenly people realise how much they're wasting. And that's a really sad indictment, isn't it, of humanity? It
goes up for a few months and then people are like, oh gosh, am I really wasting all this food? So it then goes right there.
Composting money, yes. Last question from the batch of questions that we had from last time round, and then I've got a few which have come in this evening, which I will get on to shortly. So I'll do as many as I can, but you're doing a wonderful job. Thank you so much for being open and honest with us and sharing all of your insight. So the next one is just the idle engine fining initiative. They just want to understand really how many fines have been issued, has revenue been raised for this, and what has it been spent on? How successful is it?
Yeah, so we haven't issued any fines, which is not, say it's a bad thing, because the plan was never to just fine people straight away. The officers that are out there on the ground doing these things, it's all about education and learning. And it wasn't just about you're idling, there's a sign there, we're going to fine you, because it wasn't about that. But officers have been educating, and they've not, when people have been told to switch off their engines, they have. And this came up at CEP last week, and I know there's then the possibility that they could drive down the road and do it again. But I do think it's like when people are taught to think about things, aren't they? Like most people would drive along idle their engine and not think about the issue that's causing to the environment. Whereas if they're spoken to by an official who explains the issues that they are, and just switching their engine off could help a great deal, then I do think it makes people think. And it was obviously, we don't have the ability to do that at things like traffic lights for the older cars that don't automatically switch the engine off while you're waiting and start again. But it's for places around schools, around train stations. And we continue to push that. And all of the officers out there on the ground, like the parking attendants, they all have the ability to do that. And they know that it's an important thing. I did say at CEP last week, we did so much work for it, then it did go very quiet over COVID and lockdown, because obviously people weren't out there. But it is something we're looking to try and, to start the campaign up again and get some social media out there, and just to remind people of the impact of idling, because it is mainly around the station and schools.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Can't give exact figures, unfortunately, but it is something that we, keep on at, and it's mainly behaving. And we have got the ability to fine. So if the officers saw somebody who kept doing it, then we absolutely would fine.
Perfect. Good to hear. Very good to hear. I'm going to jump onto a question now, which has come directly from our audience today. So the first one is that it's really great to hear some actions being taken by the council, such as the car chargers, the vegetable oil being used as fuel, and the car sharing. But we need to reduce the emissions from about 1 million tonnes a year to 0 by 2030, which is very commendable. That's about 130,000 tonnes per year if you divvy it up. So just adding everything up, all of the things that Hayley, you very kindly mentioned to us, it adds up to about a couple of thousand tonnes, which is probably only about 1,000th of the cuts that we need. So maybe about 0.1%. We just want to understand in the plan where the other 99.9% of the cuts will come from over these next sort of 8 years or so. Now, that's a big question.
It's a huge question, isn't it? And it's one of the things that we have really focused on addressing within our new council plan that's out for consultation, which is that whole focus about what are we directly responsible for as a council. And as Hayley showed, you know, the percentage that we're directly responsible for is tiny, but there's that whole piece, isn't there, about whether it's transport, whether it's and I think we should also be really clear, shouldn't we, that says, do you know what, I suspect residents are quite keen to do lots of things when they know what to do and how to do it. I think for businesses, it's more difficult. I think some of the tricky areas will be businesses, whether that be the buildings that they're in, the way they operate, their production methods, the investment that's required in machinery and tooling up, or investing in, I don't know, new computer equipment or whatever's required that's currently emitting all of those things. But I suppose for us, there's something about if we can cut our emissions in a relatively short space of time as a what I would call a medium-sized employer in the borough, there are lots of things that lots of people can do that, you know, hopefully we can help them by demonstrating some leadership. I think a couple of things that we've done have been relatively easy to do, but it doesn't mean to say all businesses are doing them. So it's those things, isn't it? So there are some easy steps. There are some things that are trickier, because some things that we perhaps can all take comfort from, which might be, do you know what, the ability to go off and buy an EV. Doesn't mean to say that the national grid is particularly green all of the time. So there are all of those things that we're really focused on being clear about what's our responsibility and where we can enable with policies and strategies. So if somebody's going to build houses here in the borough, that we've got the highest standards that we've got that may not be somewhere else, but also educate, encourage and empower people so that residents and businesses know what they can do, which is why the green teams are there really to say, it's human nature, isn't it? We can do things that are made easy for us. So actually, if we can visit businesses or people who are struggling to make the change, and then we can make it easier, they're much more likely to just bridge a smaller gap.
We need a definite pivot point by the sounds of it, where everyone sees everyone else doing it and they want to jump on board. And let's hope that we get that nudge mentality from everyone, herd mentality, as we say. So yeah, wonderful. I've got another question. I'm conscious of time again, so we've got about 10 minutes left. This question here is around biodiversity again. So how can there be biodiversity improvement happening in every ward when so much green space is being lost to housing and commercial developments? So getting developers to offset the loss by having a technical net gain doesn't really make up for us losing the green space locally. It would be ideally better to restore the land to woodland or wetlands, depending on the area, than destroy it by building on it. So I don't know who'd like to answer that question.
I'm going to go with that because that's probably our biggest challenge right now as a council with the local plan update, which is how do we reduce the housing number? How do we protect everything that everybody who lives in the borough absolutely loves about living here in Basingstoke-on-Deane, which is the green spaces, our landscapes and our countryside. I think that fundamentally is about reducing the housing number. I think there is also something that unfortunately I'm not responsible for, which is some of the frameworks that are used for measuring biodiversity. I think that it's easy to shoot holes through them. Mm-hmm. When I say, you know, it's that stuff, isn't it? Are we talking about quality or are we talking about quantity? And sometimes both are important. You know, there's a reality about even things that may look like arable fields at the moment, where actually can be a huge amount of specialist and very sort of important ecology in there. There's also something about, if I thought about some of the challenges for us as councillors, where we need to develop our own expertise. It's very easy to talk about things which are national headlines or about canopy restoration, when actually, if we looked at our landscape, wetlands and blue carbon and all those sorts of things may just be as important or even easier in some of our landscapes than planting trees, and they may have all sorts of extra benefits as well as far as the environment is concerned. So there is something that says, sadly, one of our jobs, and it is every job of a borough councillor to take responsibility for saying where the houses are going to go. We're not in a position where we can not deliver any housing in our borough. And I get that some people have very strong views about that if you build one house, there's a net deficit instantly. But sadly, that is the job that we're in. And there is something about mitigation, even if it doesn't mitigate everything completely.
Oh gosh, it is a very, very difficult topic, and it's very, very complicated. I absolutely understand that, and I'm sure everyone on here does as well.
The government have brought in, through the Environment Act, the local nature recovery strategies. So officers have been looking at that, because Hampshire's going to have to lead on that, and we're waiting for DEFRA to set out how that will work. But that will be quite key, I think, in working with house builders, and that's how officers are looking at that at the moment, and we're waiting for information to funnel through on those.
Lovely. Well, thank you so much. Now, we are really getting close for time, and I have got loads of questions coming in here. I can't keep up with them all. There's an incredible amount, which we may need to send to you both afterwards for more responses, if that's okay. So I've got a question here. So incinerators are far better than landfill, but should not replace recycling schemes. Just because plastics and Tetra Paks are calorific, i.e. they burn well, does not mean they should go into the incinerator. So the incinerator food collection is coming up quite a lot here. Hard plastic recycling, and some comments around reduce, reusing and then recycling. But please share your thoughts, Simon and Hayley, on this.
I totally agree that incineration is definitely better than landfill, and that's where we're better than many authorities, but it's also better not to incinerate in the first place. And it goes back to what we were saying just now, trying to reduce waste in the first place and trying to reuse, and it's moving people away from plastics. And the government have been going on for years now, and then Brexit happened and then COVID happened, but hopefully we're pushing more towards it, about looking at this tax on those that manufacture plastics to try and steer away from it. We want to recycle plastics here in Basingstoke. We tried it. It was really successful. But then I was told it was being picked up and incinerated somewhere up north. And it's like, that's just not what we want. We want a sustainable market. There was a programme on BBC a number of years ago, and Hugh Fearnley-Whittinstall went out and followed all this plastic, and most of it ended up in a foreign country, swept up on a beach or in the sea. And he specifically said that he didn't know where all this plastic had come from in England, but he knew none of it had come from Hampshire, because Hampshire always picks sustainable markets. So we always know where our waste ends up. And that has been why we haven't been able to recycle as much in the past. But we are now working with markets, with the government, to get people to enable plastic recycling at curbside. And the hope is that those markets can then grow because more people are doing it, more things can be done with it. But at the same time, it's also reducing the use of plastics in the first place. So I know people are always saying, we've got rid of the plastics. And I'm always going back and saying yes, because there is no sustainable market at the moment. There are markets out there, absolutely, but they're at capacity. Officers are checking on a regular basis whether they're back again. But all these smaller organisations that do it, they would get to capacity. We don't know where that waste is ending up. Lots of authorities are collecting plastic, but I know that they're not recycling it all. You physically and literally scientifically cannot recycle black plastics. That always comes out of the waste stream. A number of authorities just collect it because they always have, and it would be too difficult to take it out the waste stream. But it's then being sorted at their material recovery facilities and incinerated. So absolutely, plastic is a big thing. Plastic bottles we recycle because they're great. They can make fleeces. They go into loads of different things, and there's markets for them around the country. It's just what we don't want is them going out the country, and we want to make sure that there are markets, sustainable markets, that will properly recycle them.
Lovely. It sounds like a very responsible way to be thinking about it. Very difficult to educate and share all of that with everyone because it is so complicated. So absolutely understand that. Now, we're still getting loads more comments and questions coming in, but we are going to have to wrap up because we've got 4 minutes and I'm sure everyone would like to enjoy the rest of their evening. There's so many little questions going on around recycling, biodiversity, renewable energy, how are we going to be able to meet all of these targets? I think you've got a really engaged audience here. So I suppose really in summary, from all of the questions that we've gone through and all of the questions we haven't even managed to touch on, it is a complicated it is a whole complicated tapestry because everything is interconnected at the end of the day. We need to be able to work together and collaborate. It's got to be a cooperative thing between all of the residents and the council and the businesses, and we obviously need government and charities involved as well. So it's a huge piece for everyone. Thank you so much, though, for answering those questions. If you've got any last little words, Hayley or Simon, please feel free to impart them now. You've got about a minute, and then we will need to close down and say our thanks to everyone and have a good evening.
Well, all I was going to say was, because I've seen some of the critical comments, and I don't want to ignore some of them, because actually some of them are very personal, and I'm gonna deal with some of them head on. Have I tried to cycle across Basingstoke? Yes. Whilst ordering for my EV, which was on order for a year and a half, and we all know how difficult that is, and I don't even know whether it's the right thing to do as far as operational and embedded carbon, I cycled into the council every day, 5 days a week for 5 weeks. And do you know what? It was A, very easy, and B, very disappointing, because actually whether it was cycling from Rooks down to the council or from Rooks down to Hatch Warren and Beggarwood, I was disappointed by the number of people I didn't see. And I absolutely guess that lots of people will lobby us to say it could be better. And do you know what? Absolutely. And there are some things that I'm really frustrated by, that whether it be lighting that could be better, or I think sometimes we don't cut hedges back as far as we could because we're worried about the environment. But actually, to get more people out cycling and walking, we need the light to show on those footpaths and those cycle paths. But that fundamentally shows you some of the challenges that we've got with human behaviour. We know human behaviour is really challenging, and we've got to be as psychologically informed as possible. And some things that we currently have inherited as citizens of Basingstoke and Deane make it intrinsically very difficult. We've got some real tensions and we've got some real difficult decisions. And I really appreciate all your support, because it's also activists that keep us really honest about what some of those difficulties and tensions are, Rowan. So I just wanted to thank everybody for their participation this evening.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you. And Hayley, you maybe got 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, so thank you for having us. And yeah, it's a huge topic and there's a lot there, and we're doing what we can. And I know waste becomes a whole different topic. And again, we could have a whole nother conversation on that. But hopefully we've given you some information, and we can always come back to you with any outstanding questions, so answers.
Wonderful. Wonderful stuff. Thank you. And thank you very much to everyone who's worked hard at Greener Basingstoke to make sure we could put this event on. So thank you. That's great. I know that for anyone who is interested in doing what they can, Greener Basingstoke always love to have new members. So please do feel free to get in touch with us. I know we've got an email address, we've got a website. Kerry's probably going to be best to tell us all what we've got in terms of getting in contact.
Thank you, Rowan. I have just popped it in the chat because I know people will be dropping off now. But yes, please do reach out to us on info@greenerbasingstoke.org, or look at some of our resources on the website at greenerbasingstoke.org. We're also on Facebook and Instagram we are Eco Basingstoke, and Twitter we are also Eco Basingstoke. So we would welcome some more help and participation in addressing some of these issues. As Simon and Hayley have said, we all need to work together on this. So thank you, Rowan, for being amazing chair.
Thank you very much to everybody. Yeah, it's been a lovely session, and have a lovely evening, everyone. We'll let you all go back and enjoy whatever it is you've got now lined up. Take care. Bye. Bye.